With the death of its inventor in 1894, the saxophone really struggled to find its place in the classical world. Through until the 1920s, the real progress in the saxophone was left to the French military bands and developments in entertainment, popular and jazz music in the US. It wasn't until the 1920s, when we see the arrival of two saxophone virtuosi and pioneers, that the saxophone was firmly established as a classical instrument. Marcel Mule trained in France and performed with the French Guard Republican Band. In 1923, he became the soloist, taking over from his teacher, Francois Combel. It is in this band that he developed and perfected his saxophone skills and emerged as a leading virtuosi saxophone player. Marcel Mule was invited to reopen the saxophone class in the Paris Conservatory after it had been closed for 70 years. The class reopened in 1942, and this was fundamental to the saxophone being accepted as a classical instrument, as it now had a home in one of the world's leading music schools. Here, Marcel Mule was able to gain commissions and works written for him by respected professional composers of the time. These composers include Eugene Bozza, Paul Maurice, Lantier, and Riviere. Now that the saxophone had its home in the Paris Conservatory, every single year a piece would be written for the saxophone that would take part in the Paris Conservatory's saxophone solo instrumental music competition. This meant that the saxophone every year would have a piece written for it that demanded of its performer technical brilliance. One of the most famed works that came out from this competition is Desinclo's Prelude, Cadence and Finale, that is a piece that is performed today in the repertoire. Being at the Paris Conservatory also meant that Marcel Mule was able to train many students to then go on and become the next generation of saxophone professors and virtuosi, which he did very successfully. His students include Daniel Defaye, Jean-Marie Londex, Eugene Rousseau and Frederick Hemke. As part of his professorship, Marcel Mule also took it upon himself to write many etude and study books that would help his students and other students to become better at playing the saxophone. Another very important contribution of Marcel Mule is that he established the first classical saxophone quartet. Their first performance was in 1928, and he established this quartet with other members of the French Guard Republican Band. In 1932, the ensemble used vibrato, and this was the first time that vibrato was seen from a classical saxophone ensemble. After his success in the group, Marcel Mule decided to incorporate it into his own playing, and we have the use of vibrato in the classical setting to thank Marcel Mule for. This quartet, as they grew more successful, inspired compositions from many composers, compositions which have become the core of the quartet repertoire today. These include works by Desinclo, Dubois, Glazunov, Bozza, Pienne and Riviere. The second equally important saxophone pioneer and virtuoso was Sigurd Rascher. Originally born in Germany, Sigurd Rascher graduated from the Stuttgart Music School in 1927 as a clarinetist. He originally began playing the saxophone to make money in jazz bands, but once realizing the instrument's potential, decided to train himself classically on the instrument and promote it as a serious classical instrument. He made his first public performance in 1932 at the Hanover Music Festival, where he premiered the von Bork Saxophone Concerto. After hearing him perform, audiences and musicians were impressed by his technical facility, his silken tone, and most importantly, his impressive mastery of the upper register. Throughout his career, Sigurd Rascher developed his use of the upper register of the saxophone and strove to increase the range of the saxophone from a 2.5 octave instrument to a 4-octave instrument. This he did very successfully, firstly by writing a pedagogical book, Top Tones, to show other students how they could improve their range by a serious study of the overtones. He also managed to maintain the longevity of a 4-octave saxophone instrument by inspiring composers to write works for him. As they realized that he could play 4 octaves on the instrument, this demand went into their compositions. And as these compositions form the basis of the saxophone repertoire today, it is now expected that saxophone players can play 4 octaves on the instrument. In 1939, Sigurd Rascher became the first saxophone player to perform with both the Boston Symphony Orchestra and the New York Philharmonic. Here he played Iber's Concertino da Camera and Debussy's Premier Rhapsody. Sigurd Rascher often worked with orchestras as a soloist performer. In fact, throughout his career, he had performed across Europe, America, Africa, Australia, and New Zealand with over 250 different orchestras. In total, Sigurd Rascher inspired over 150 different composers to write works for the saxophone. It is also interesting to note that he did not commission a single work for saxophone. He inspired composers to write for the saxophone. He never paid for their work. The influence of Sigurd Rascher and Marcel Mule is insurmountable. Between the two of them, they established the saxophone as a serious classical instrument through their own technical virtuosity of the instrument, through seeking composers to write for the instrument, and through maintaining pedagogical efforts to ensure that there would be a next generation to continue the saxophone as a classical instrument. Now I'd like to play for you a recording of Marcel Mule playing Iber's Concertino da Camera. This was recorded in 1939. Now I'd like to play for you a short video footage of Sigurd Rascher giving a recital where he plays Maurice Whitney's Rumba. Here is a short clip from a promotional advertisement of Sigurd Rascher working with the Buscher Saxophone Company to show how he achieves the overtones on the saxophone using a keyless saxophone instrument.
Look, no keys, all up here. That builds tone quality.